Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Complex Like Wine, the podcast where we talk about complicated things and improve over time just like wine does. It is the beginning of the new year, and so I'm really excited to have Judy with us today. Before we get into it, of course, we always have our wine. So I am drinking a Petite Syrah. Hi Judy, welcome.
Hi, I'm Judy, and I'm drinking a Sancerre.
Sancerre. Well, cheers, virtual cheers.
Cheers to you. It's the best podcast I've been on.
Thank you. Yeah, I was sharing with Judy before we recorded how the podcast came about, and so excited to have you. Thank you for tuning all the way from near Boston. And so some background on you that I know, you got your PhD with Harvard and you used to talk
No, I don't have a PhD. I have a master's from Harvard.
Master's. Okay, excuse me. So you have your master's from Harvard, and what's your degree in?
That one was from the Graduate School of Education, and my undergraduate degree is from Wellesley.
Wellesley, okay.
Yeah.
And so also from what your assistant shared with me beforehand, doing the recording and all that, there's a lot of topic and you touch a lot on childhood trauma and all of that, correct?
Right.
Right. So out of curiosity, how did you get into wanting to learn about that and now speak on it?
Well, okay, let's back up. So my name is Judy Foreman, and if you're trying to look me up, it's Foreman, and you can find me I have a website, judyforeman.com. And the book I'm going to talk about is called Let the More Loving One Be Me. And it's my first memoir. It's my fifth book altogether. And for most of my adult life, I have been a journalist at a major paper, the Boston Globe, right here near where I live. I wrote this book, I wrote it on purpose, but I didn't really set out to write a book. I started writing memoirs because I'm part of an organization at Harvard called the Harvard Institute for Learning and Retirement. I'm not really retired, but I got into the program. And they have a lot of classes, and I decided to take a class on memoir writing. And it met every week, so I wrote a memoir every week. And after a few semesters of the class, I had a huge stack of memoirs, and I decided to pull them all together into a book. And it took some time to kind of arrange them in a nice arc that made sense, but I finally did. And the first few chapters of the book are about my growing up. It, in retrospect, was a very traumatic childhood. The chapters after that are a lot about love. I'm on my third marriage, and it's the best yet. My second husband died of cancer, and my first husband and I got divorced. And it's about overall my search for truth, the truth of what happened to me as a child, and the truth that I try to find as a journalist, doing a lot of reporting and digging deep to get the facts on whatever I'm writing about, including controversial things. So tell me what you'd like me to talk about, and I will do it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, if you're comfortable with sharing, we'd kind of like to learn more about your childhood, maybe some of the things that you went through that kind of now, as an adult, you realize childhood trauma and having to process that. And then now as an adult, how do you navigate being able to work through it and get to a place where maybe you've overcome it or if you've learned to manage it or just got to a place of healing?
Yes, I feel like I've definitely gotten to a place of healing. Not that the healing is over. I think it's a continuous evolutionary process. I think two things basically happened when I was growing up. My father was horrible. He was a very aggressive, rageful, angry alcoholic. He was also a vice president of one of America's biggest companies, a real corporate type. He used to come undressed, except for a small T-shirt, to my bedroom door every night when I was a teenager. And he was essentially naked from the waist down. And I was terrified every night of my growing up. I thought he was going to rape me. He never did, but it was like a psychological rape. It was extremely traumatic. I was terrified. Um, the other piece of that is my mother. Where did she think he was going every night, undressed, uh, down the hall toward my room? She didn't protect me. Um, and worse than not protecting me, emotionally, she essentially abandoned me. She was not emotionally available. I think to herself, she was out of touch with her own feelings, and she did not allow me any feelings, or my brother for that matter. It was a really not so uncommon, but very screwed up situation where there was a very neglectful, emotionally neglectful. I mean, she dressed me. I had clothes, I had a house, I had food, but emotionally, I had no one there for me. So together, that was the trauma of my growing up. Um, I have been very lucky in finding a career that's been fabulous for me and a lot of fun and very gratifying, very meaningful. And I think journalism is really a noble profession. And I've been lucky in love. Even my first husband, we were both very young. We were just too young to get married, basically. My second husband was great, and my third husband is the most intimate. I have the most closeness and intimacy emotionally with him that I've ever had in my life, and that's been wonderful. The thing that has helped me the most is therapy, um, and it's this long, slow process healing from this much trauma. But it's been a real important important way to understand what happened to me, understand what that did to me psychologically, and come to grips with it more and more the more I continue. So that's the base. The type of therapy I've tried some different types over the years. The type that has helped me the most is called internal family systems. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
A lot of people haven't heard of it. It's another one. It's one of the talking therapies, but you learn to see that you have little parts inside of you, not just your core self, but like you may have an angry part or an anxious part or a very sad part. You learn to identify those feelings and be respectful toward them and not be so terrified of them, and learn to be gentle with those feelings in yourself. So that's it in a nutshell. But there's a lot. It's a very subtle and deep process,
Mm-hmm.
and very valuable.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that with me and the podcast listeners. I Going into therapy, a lot of my work was focused on my childhood trauma. And I think when people think of childhood trauma, they're expecting to hear, oh, there was like physical abuse, maybe sexual abuse, neglect in terms of like no food, no the housing, all that. But I think people forget to count in or factor in there's the emotional neglect. And when your parent is emotionally unavailable, how that can really impact a child. My mother was that way, very emotionally unavailable, neglectful to me. I have my single dad, but not a, especially when it comes from the mother standpoint, not a lot of people recognize that or maybe give it as much quote unquote credit as compared to other circumstances. And so, right. So with therapy, that was a big thing I had to really factor in of, okay, yes, much older now, but there's still a lot of things from when I was like 5 or 6 going upward into my teens that were not addressed. And I had to recognize in therapy, like you said, like not being afraid of going in there and really acknowledging what's happened and learning how to process through it.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of courage to do what you did and what I did and am doing. There's a lot of pain in that. And it's interesting, I would certainly proudly call myself a feminist, and there's almost a taboo as a feminist into blaming mothers for things, because for years we blame mothers for everything. But mothers are very important. Fathers are to any caretaker of a small child is important. Culturally, it tends to be mothers who do that more than fathers, especially for someone who's a little older like I am. Fathers were sort of, excuse me, not in the picture. But that mother-child bond is hugely important. And some mothers, including mine, and it sounds like yours, were not able to do it. Maybe through no fault of their own. I suspect in my mother's case, I don't know about yours, she didn't get that from her mother. And so it's kind of a legacy thing. But that didn't make my pain any less. That neglect, based on her own fear, in my case, fear of intimacy, fear of feelings, that's caused me, that was damaging, that was traumatic. And it's taken a long time to come to terms with it. I don't feel angry. Maybe I should, but I don't. But it's been a long slog to kind of figure that out, and
Mm-hmm.
not just intellectually figure it out, but emotionally heal from it.
Right. Was there any other fears, like you mentioned, fear of intimacy, fear of closeness? Was there anything else that you recognized as you got older was very prominent that stemmed from this childhood trauma?
Well, a fear of sadness, a fear of understanding. My mother was always chipper. Everything is fine. Everything is fine, even though my father was abusing me. And in his rage and general hostility, he was abusing all of us, all three of us, my brother, my mother, and me. And, just like my father never let us call him dad, never let my brother and me call him dad. I mean, my mother would say, "Oh, he's a wonderful man." He was not a wonderful man. He was a very screwed up man. Um, but the lies that are told to children are very powerful. Um, and he was also an alcoholic, and that's another feature of growing up. Something like 1 in every 5 American adults grew up in an alcoholic family, and one of the hallmarks of that is just all the lies. You basically learn not to feel and not to tell the truth, and that was true in my family too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Some of the big things that I struggled with, and I don't think I've gone to the point where I've healed from it until very recently, was fear of intimacy, fear of closeness, vulnerability for sure. It was hard for me to be vulnerable on any level, whether it was friends, especially romantically, or with family. And I think also the fear of wanting to count on somebody, since I had to grow up very independent and just take care of myself from a young age, that now as I've gotten older, to allow somebody to want to step in, offer help, or for me to accept help has been a huge growth of myself this year.
yeah, yeah. No, that's true. Because if you grow up not being able to count on anybody, it's hard to let yourself depend on someone in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. What have been other things that maybe through your healing journey or shock or surprises for you to reflect and recognize, or maybe with other conversations you've had on this topic that you've noticed have been a common trend in regards to people that have childhood trauma?
What have I noticed in other people who've had it?
Yeah, or within yourself, that maybe as you were going through your therapies and your healing journey, that you didn't realize this was another part of the healing or an aspect.
Um, I'm sort of stumped. I'm not sure how to answer that. Um, for me, it's mainly been the talking therapy, the internal family systems, IFS, that's been really helpful. Um, I'm not sure there've been any surprise. I mean, it took me a while to even realize that what my father did was abuse, and even longer to realize that the emotional, my mother's fear of emotions, which was she put very strongly on me, to realize that was abuse is sort of such an ugly term. Certainly was a form of neglect. Uh, it was not intentional, but it had huge consequences. My parents also practiced a form of divide and conquer. My brother and I were never close. We didn't have each other. We could have, but we didn't have each other to lean on. I didn't want to be like him, and he didn't want to be like me. I mean, I saw him as really screwing up all the time and getting in trouble, and I didn't want to do that. And he saw me as busting my rear end to try to get my parents' approval and not getting it, and he didn't want to do that. Um, he was eventually sent away to boarding school when he was in high school. He something I don't know what called his situation to the attention of somebody, either a doctor or a school counselor or something, and he was sent to a psychiatrist. And from what I remember, he was like silent for like a year and then burst out into this homicidal rage against my father. And the powers that be, I assume it was the psychiatrist, said, we got to get this kid, this boy, out of the home, lest some violence really happen. Such was the degree of rage against my father, triggered by my father, of course, who was also very rageful. So I'm glad he got sent away. On the other hand, they were essentially exiling his anger and his rage as well as him. Why was my brother sent away, not my father, the cause of it
Mm-hmm.
all? So there were a lot of things to think about with that. Um, and it doesn't just, this kind of family situation doesn't affect just one person, it affects the whole family. And it's the whole dynamic, and it certainly affects the children who are the powerless ones. But I think the wife can also be powerless, and she certainly seemed powerless um, vis-a-vis my father.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure now as you've gone older that reflecting back on how your mom handled everything, it brought you better insight on why she handled things the way she did, and kind of tying back to what you said that her persona was very chipper and all that. Maybe it was like rooted to the like trying to avoid the situation and kind of right.
Exactly. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it was avoidance. Yeah, and it's a shame because I think she wasn't that way before she met him. Of course, I don't know. I wasn't there, but my father, her father, was not rich. He had sort of a normal job, and he somehow lost money when she was halfway through college, and she had to drop out because he ran out of money. And my father, I'm sure to her, looked like a good prospect. And in fact, he did. He made tons of money, and then went bankrupt himself. He had no judgment. He signed up with this commercial real estate company, and my mother thought the guys were sleazy, and she said, "Don't do it." And he did it, and he lost just about all of his money. So he was like a megalomaniac, kind of like Trump, just very angry, narcissistic, authoritarian, all those things. Um, Not a pleasant guy, not a happy guy either.
It and I recognize that with my mother. She was There's like the narcissism in there for sure, and I think it all rooted down to she was just severely unhappy with her life, her situation, and like you said, it doesn't just affect the person; it will affect the whole household. And my family and I will talk about this from here to from time to time, where when my mom physically left the house and moved out of state, the presence, just the environment of the house, everything was just so much lighter. Like none of us were no longer on walking on eggshells and tense. It was just like we could get we can catch a breath.
Exactly. And my father was the one we walked on eggshells around, but also my mother, because I could never, ever relax with my mother. Never. I'm sure as a baby, she told me later she was terrified of babies. So that tells you how she had to keep a distance. And later on, she never understood me or anything real about life. It was all, role playing essentially.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you when your mother walked out?
So I was 19. So I'm 26 now. So not somewhat kind of recent, but not too recent anymore. But no, she was physically with us up until I was 19. So growing up, I try not to be dramatic, but it really is the case. Like I didn't really have much of a childhood because I had to grow up right away. You know, I had to start cooking for myself in elementary school because she wouldn't cook for me, and a lot of different neglectful stuff as well. And I think it was so the dynamic that we had was at least okay. So this was one of the things I really learned in therapy. I was taught from her that love is conditional. So if she was happy for me, then she would show me love. But if she wasn't, which was most of the time, she would take it away. So it was kind of like a earning points reward system. And like a punishment thing was that she just wouldn't cook for me or pick me up from school. And that was just part of it. And so it having my dad, he raised me to be independent. And I think to a fault, it created a hyper independence where now as an adult, that the fear and vulnerability just was stemming across everything because I just learned like I can only count on myself and that's it. And so it's made me grow up a lot faster than most of my peers. And so I think growing up, I always had a hard time really relating to my peer group just because the things I was dealing with at home was not the typical what everyone else was dealing with. Would you say for yourself that you had to grow up a lot faster than most of your peers, or that you would just for yourself think that like I didn't need to grow up this fast?
No, I think I grew up too slowly.
Mm.
I think it took me much longer to even start to grow up. I think I
Oh,
was so
interesting.
enmeshed with the craziness that I didn't even recognize it as destructive. I think I was still caught in the system of trying to get my parents' approval and get their love, which was not gettable, you know. But I think it took me way longer than you to separate
Mm-hmm.
and see what was going on. I commend you for figuring it out as early as as young as you have. Um, it probably doesn't seem young to you, but it seems young to me that you've gotten so far.
it
People have different paths through all this.
right, and that's why I'm actually glad that you shared your perspective was quite a bit different from me. Because I haven't really encountered much people that when they've shared on the podcast or through friends where most of them would say that they felt their growth was a little bit behind. And so it's just thank you for sharing that because it's good to show that yeah, paths are very different and people respond to things so differently. There's no like cookie cutter way of how you respond to trauma.
That's really true. That's really true.
For with your career and with your book, what are some of the things that through sharing your childhood stories and your healing with trauma, what are some like key things that are messages that you want to share with people that read the book or listen to this podcast or through your career?
Definitely read the book, which is called Let the More Loving One Be Me. Um, Finding a career that is gratifying is huge. And women have historically haven't been focused on that much, but work, if it's good and valuable and makes you happy, is hugely important. Definitely worth pursuing, and relationships too. I mean, love, obviously, and learning to pick a good partner. And trying to make it as intimate as possible, like starting with your own self. How vulnerable can you allow yourself to be? Um, and for me, I mean, journalism is fundamentally a search for truth, and so is therapy. And I think that's the pervasive arc for my book and for my life. has been, really trying to figure out the truth, and to acknowledge the truth that took me years to acknowledge. So that's how I would kind of wrap it up.
Mm-hmm. One last little question, since you talked about, finding love, you're now with your third husband, and like this has been the most intimate and seems like the healthiest. What are some things that you would tell your younger self from everything you've learned through your marriages about how to obtain a healthy, intimate relationship?
You know, the weird thing is, I think you have to look to yourself. In fact, the person who founded Internal Family Systems, his name is Richard Schwartz. His book is called "You Are the One You've Been Looking For." To focus on yourself, and where your defenses or hangups are blocking you from being able to be intimate with someone. I mean, it's funny. I hadn't thought about that, but that is look to yourself, not in a narcissistic way, but in a sort of open, exploring kind of way. What am I doing that might be screwing this up? Not in a guilty way, but just sort of rational way. Like, where do I fit into this? What am I doing that's, making things not good? And sometimes you are doing everything right, and the other person is just not capable.
Mm-hmm.
In which case you got to move on. But yeah, I mean, doing your own work,
Mm-hmm.
working on yourself, because ultimately you're the only one you can control, insofar as you can control anything.
Right. And I think with myself this year has been getting to a place of really seriously just being curious about myself, like rediscovering and just really focusing on loving myself first. Because if I'm at a place where I'm not in love with myself, not in a narcissistic way, but you just fully appreciate who you are, your faults, your greatness, like everything in between, because nobody's perfect, right? But just getting to a place where you fully accept everything. If you don't have that, then anytime you're searching that from somebody else, it's never gonna be good enough because it's still gonna be missing. And so I think a big part of my place of where I'm no longer afraid of vulnerability has just been I fully accept myself, and now whoever I'm with, if they can add some to what I offered for myself, perfect. But if it's for whatever reason taking away or subtracting from that, then okay, time to move on to, or just move on what's from that situation, because it's not healthy.
I commend you. I mean, you're way younger than me, and you've gotten there really fast. So I'm an admirer.
Oh, thank you so much.
No, thank you for this. This has been great.
Yes, no, I am going to include all your links, the links to the book, your website, and everything in the show notes. That way, people that are listening, they can go check you out and buy the book. Thank you for being a guest. I really appreciate connecting with you and learning.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it too. Thank
Of
you.
course. Cheers, Judy. All right, guys, I'm going to cut it off here. Thank you for tuning in this week. I'll have everything in the bio, and we'll see you in the next one. All right, bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye bye.